Hello, gentlemen. How are you on this fine evening?
I'm doing well. Just enjoying tea, tres leches, and company of good friends.
All right, that's good to hear. Good to hear, man.
Likewise.
What do you guys think about Nabisco closing down? And wait, Nabisco, Fairlawn's in Bergen County, right? I actually forget the border. Is Fairlawn Bergen?
Fairlawn, Bergen County, yeah.
All right, cool. So what do you guys think about Nabisco closing down, man? 1,000 jobs just gone. It's messed up.
What do you think, Ahmad? I have some thoughts, but let's hear you out first.
I think so long as they shift it elsewhere, I think it's okay. Although it's a immediate loss to the community, but if they shift it elsewhere, I think it's a greater good for everybody else.
Well, here's what's bothering me, or here's what's concerning to me, right? We lose Nabisco. That's not a catastrophe, right? This won't be in any history books. But then a few years ago, we lost, in 2017 or 2014, Western Union left Montville and they went to like Florida. And then Mercedes left Montville and they went to Atlanta. And then Sharp also went through some downsizing. I'm concerned at this trend of major these are, by the way, major employers. These aren't small companies that they leave and we're like, okay, whatever. You know, it's not like when Pathmark at A&P closed, nobody cared. But you lost a car company, you lost a manufacturing company, you lost a freaking fintech company, and no one's replacing them. What the hell does that mean for us?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. You know, while you're mentioning this, I thought about the mass exodus that happened during COVID. I believe the study was something around over 500 companies moved from California to Texas, just from California to Texas. And the bottom line for these companies is A, to make a profit, and B, to stay in business. And so if something like operational costs or rent or lease or the cost of electricity goes up, they can no longer afford to stay in business, especially in such an urban environment like North Jersey, where everything is through the roof.
Well, and just piggybacking off that point, think about it this way, right? So I can't speak for financial services or Mercedes, but when you're talking about manufacturing, a lot of these manufacturing jobs are not paying a livable wage. And at least in the case of Bergen County, we know that we have some of the highest tax rates in the country. So on the one hand, yes, they're losing a lot of jobs, but were those jobs in the first place providing a livable wage to the people working them? And I don't think that they were.
You know, that's a good point, because if I think about Western Union or Mercedes, I don't even have to go online. I'm sure people at Mercedes are compensated well, right? You don't have a luxury company where everyone's on food stamps behind the scenes. Western Union, same thing. You don't have a money-oriented company and the people aren't making money. So I guess it's not going to be a blow to the local economy. But at the same time, it makes you wonder, like, what role does the county play when it comes to trying to retain these companies? I mean, is there any whining and dining that takes place? Or does Bergen County just say, leave, we don't care? Because as a citizen, I'm concerned. I want my county to entice or incentivize companies and bring jobs here, bring money here, stimulate our economy. So I just wonder what it's like behind closed doors.
Well, do you want to hear the Republican theory on this?
I would love to hear all and any theories. Let's go.
Okay. So the Republican theory on this is those jobs were not very valuable anyways, and so manufacturing moved, and so all the people that did lose those jobs now have to focus on higher economic productivity. So more value-creating activities. So it's the responsibility of everybody who lost a job to retool so that they can earn a higher wage, right? That's one of them. The other point to consider is, can't speak for the county, but Fairlawn is still going to be receiving the property tax revenue from the property. So even though Nabisco has left, Nabisco is still going to be paying those property taxes, and whoever acquires the property is still going to be paying the property taxes. Is it a politically on a county level, even on a congressional level, Is it a black eye? It's a black eye because they lost 1,000 people, lost 1,000 jobs. Those are all angry voters who could then turn. You'd have to worry about public sentiment and how that would then affect the politics of the county, of the municipality, of the congressional district. But I think all in all, the loss isn't as much as we think it is. In the short term, yes, but in the long term for Bergen County, that property is going to have to be repurposed. And so either A, another manufacturing facility moves in, or B, they demolish the property and create office buildings for which other companies move in.
I think it goes back to the same concept. So there are a lot of these, these online games where you make a farm and then you keep growing and growing and growing. What ends up happening is prime real estate is expensive. And so you always outsource the farming to further out places. And in the near area, you keep what these games, what they do is you keep leveling up. So you can house more, do more production in a small facility. Bergen County is capped out on land and what they can do with that land. Whereas other states like Florida, Texas, most of the Midwest, open land. They can set up manufacturing at a fraction of the cost, even if they had to build separately. I mean, one such example in Bergen County is Quest Diagnostics at Peterborough. Humongous facility, and what they did, they downsized to a facility about a sixth of its size that they bought from a company that had already pre-built the entire lab. The city, from my understanding, gave them some tax break. They got a great deal on the property itself that they bought that was fully furnished, technologically advanced. And if you go to the original location right now, it's demolished to the ground. And from last I heard, it's actually going to become an extension of the Peterborough Landing Mall Plaza. And so, again, when we have little resources, at least when it comes to land, Bergen County as a whole, I mean, look, Paramus has 3 shopping centers. It's huge. Yep. Look at how much space is dedicated to working. And another fact is, in the morning, when we look at New York City, because it's so close to us, the population of New York City changes by 3 million people between morning and night. So in the morning, 3 million people come into New York City, and at night they go away. The vast majority are coming from New Jersey. I mean, just hop on GW Bridge, you would know exactly what's happening. And so the way I see it now is our home, Bergen County, is no longer a suburb by the vast majority in comparison to most of America. It has become pretty urban. And so when you have so much many apartment complexes and homes on top of each other, relatively small homes, you have to then consolidate the amount of resources that land can provide. In this case, if they're demolishing that huge lab, then the lab moved, by the way, to the next county that's not that dense, right? Yeah. And now they're extending the plaza. It's a win-win for everybody.
So how about this, right? I think at the same time, so what highway is this on again? I forgot.
It's 46.
Nabisco is 46. Right 46. On 46, yeah.
Right on 46.
Yeah.
So if you look a little bit, 46 west? Or?
Actually, no, the backside is almost connecting to Route 17 as well.
Yeah.
It's only separated by railway tracks.
So I think there's 2 things that could happen. Clearly, the manufacturing facility was there because they could manufacture products and then easily ship them by rail. So I think if we're talking about a repurposing of the property, I think A, it could become a logistics center because it's conveniently placed, or B, if you look a little bit ahead of Nabisco is a residential development, apartments, right? And one thing that's a big concern in Bergen County, apart from affordability, is having adequate residential housing supply. And so I think that much acreage could serve probably, probably a thousand households, or 1,000 apartments rather, right? And if you look at the new style of building, again, earlier on the highway, you're going to see apartments on the top and commercial storefronts on the bottom. I think they could replicate the same thing, because the main concern, financially speaking, is making sure that there's no long-term loss of economic activity. And with the logistics hub, there's not going to be any long-term loss of economic activity. And even with apartments, there's not going to be any long-term loss of economic activity. In fact, being that it's in Fairlawn would probably like to see apartments, because it adds more constituents. It increases the tax dollars that they can collect via commerce, as opposed to a logistics hub, which would probably increase the traffic on the highways. They wouldn't want that either. So I think most likely what we're going to see is the facility demolished for apartments. But yeah.
That's an interesting point you make about apartments, right? Look at what happened during COVID. I remember in my own neighborhood, there was an influx of people from New York City all of a sudden coming in and buying homes.
Yeah.
And I could tell by New York license plates. And I said, why is this the case? And what happened was overnight, let's say your dad's working, mom's working, 2 kids go to school, typical normal American family. All of a sudden now, each child needs their own room to do their Zoom classes or the Google Meets meeting. The dad needs his own office. The mother needs her own space. And so they cannot manage with one in the living room, one in the dining. And so if somebody had a home or an apartment with 3 bedrooms, all of a sudden they needed 4. If someone was in a 2-bedroom apartment, they needed 3 bedrooms. And so a lot of people started finding bigger places. And so hence the need for residential buildings went up. Not only that, it's also reflective in the properties. Properties skyrocketed in COVID, and they're still pretty high. I don't think they've come down. Car prices were inflated, and now they've come down, but properties are still extremely inflated. Another thing that COVID made people realize is how many jobs that we thought were not replaceable can actually be done from home. Or a huge or vast majority of that role can be done from home.
Yeah.
And now we have people on more of a hybrid schedule, where they work 2 days in the office, a couple of days at home, vice versa. And so the everlasting demand for residential buildings, especially for those that want to be in Bergen County, is only going to grow. And when it comes to manufacturing, it's only going to move further out, and people are just going to have to commute.
Okay, so here's something you guys have both touched on that concerns me as well. So I'm a Jersey boy, born and raised. I live in Bergen County. I don't like seeing, and Ahmad touched on this, a lot of people moving into the county, essentially displacing people who grew up here, they want to buy or rent here. There's no protections or preferences given to these new developments for Bergen County residents. If you go to New York City makes sure that 10% of every building that's put up is only people from the city already are allowed to apply for it, right? There's some protection. San Diego does the same thing, where they make sure, because they have a housing crisis in California and San Diego and San Francisco especially.
Question, sorry to interrupt. Is 10% reserved for lower income families in New York City, or is it just general New York City residents?
So 8% is for people who are disabled, 10% is for New York City residents, and then another 10% is for people who are low or no income.
So are we talking about a total?
So we're talking like
30?
a third. We're talking like a third of these. Yeah.
Oh wow, of new developments.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. Wow.
So the problem for me is, like, you guys talk about apartment buildings being put up. We have a lot of outsiders coming into Bergen County, and that's fine. That's good for economic development. But it's disheartening for people who grew up here, who are watching, by the way, jobs that their parents might have held and companies they might have worked for locally now being outsourced. I mean, basically, New York City people are coming here, but then people here are having to go to what? Passaic County, Sussex County. That's also concerning. I mean, what role does the county have just in terms of ethics and doing right by the people who grew up here in order to afford them some protections when it comes to housing, right? Affordability and accessibility.
Well, think about it this way, right? Housing is meant for who? Housing is meant for families, right? You have a few kids, you'll want a house, right? One thing that I find very interesting, and I think generally this is the trajectory of society as a whole, is people are having less and less kids and are in need, are not as much in need of houses, right? So for example, the big backyard and the big front porch,
the picket fence,
the picket fence. I mean, those were houses designed for larger families. I also think that families are not as large anymore, and I think people rent for two reasons. Number one, people rent because it's an easy way to start their life, right? But I think also number two is a lot of people who are renters are people that are priced out of home ownership. And I think if people are priced out of home ownership, then we have to kind of flip the way that we think about residential apartments. That might actually be making Bergen County more affordable than it currently is with these rising property values. Because I don't think, those property values are going to slide anytime soon. I think they're just going to continue rising. So I think it's giving an affordable option, and I think also it's because a lot of renters are young, it's attracting a lot of young talent who might be getting priced out of, for example, New York. And we know that Fair Lawn is a commuter town, like most towns in Bergen County. So I'm erring on the side of saying that this might be a good thing long term. In the short term, it's going to be painful. And I think until we get to that point, 10 or 15 years from now, there's going to be a lot of growing pains. But net, I think it's good.
And I think, historically speaking, if we look at the early beginnings of America, especially around the late 1800s when the Industrial Revolution kind of picked up.
Oh, he went way, way back.
Right?
Right.
Traditionally, folks that were workers, that worked, they lived closer to the area of work. I mean, folks that were rich didn't live in New York City at that time. It was the working class that lived in New York City. They lived and worked there. And so it's only natural that when a place grows, and we're all seeing the effects of New York City growing and expanding, whether it's the 5 boroughs or whether it's towns like Hackensack ever so expanding, and we can already see, like Hackensack, for example, is building upward now. I mean, if you go down River Road, you have these luxury apartment buildings coming up next to the jail. I mean, and that jail was made when there was nothing there.
Yeah, no, you're right.
And so we are running out of space. And eventually what's going to happen is just like people were priced out of New York City, paying a couple $1,000s a month in rent for these apartments. Eventually that's what's going to happen in the long term. But the good thing is more opportunity. With more people comes more businesses. I mean, businesses like Uber Eats, DoorDash, they would not exist had it not been for urban towns.
Yeah.
Taxis are not a thing outside of New York City. I mean, Uber just now made it accessible for suburban towns to order a cab. But before Uber, I'm talking just a decade ago, the only way for you to move around in New York City was hail a cab.
You gotta find the yellow
right?
taxi, right?
And so with communities developing, growing, business grows. When business grows, more opportunities for employment. And when more opportunities for employment come, people will be there as well. Now, people will still choose. Many people will still choose to live a little further away. Let's say not in Bergen County. They might live in the neighboring counties because it's cheaper to live. That's fine. That's what we already do right now. Most folks that work in New York City probably live in Bergen County.
This is a very interesting point that Ahmad brought up, right? Because he's right. Before, what used to happen was, there were factory workers, and there were company towns, and so you lived in close proximity to your factory, your place of work. But I think another thing, and this is, I guess, part of the broader arc of America, is that we have to accept that 90% of the economy is a service-based economy, right? And yes, we're losing manufacturing, but at the same time, all we're doing with manufacturing is we're outsourcing the manufacturing to places that are cheaper. And when we outsource the manufacturing to places that are cheaper, whether they be the Midwest or whether they be other countries, it also keeps our goods cheap. Listen, if you want to pay 20 cents more or 50 cents more for paper towels, then be my guest. But most people don't. And so when labor is expensive, when the cost of production is expensive, your goods will be expensive. That's a larger point.
It's a good thing you bring it up. I mean, hey, Chaudhry, would you pay $10,000 for an iPhone?
I would absolutely pay $10,000 for an iPhone only if the iPhone was like the iPhone 9000 or something.
Made out of gold?
It had a gold, yeah.
No, but he brings a good point. Look, we're living, when you look at it from a global perspective, we are reaping the benefits of every single country across the globe. I mean, look at the table we're here, the chairs we're on, probably made in China. These phones were assembled and made in China. These parts were outsourced in some mine somewhere that we probably couldn't even fathom working in. There are mine towns where the life expectancy for a lot of these people is hardly 30 years old, because they know when we start working, all the char that goes in their lungs, they're probably not going to outlive their own children. Like, no way.
You guys want to hear something interesting? You mentioned China and you mentioned manufacturing. Did you guys know that a lot, China is known for manufacturing, but and this is proven, as an economy matures and economic activity veers towards a service-based economy, manufacturing gets outsourced as well. The same thing is happening in China, where now, because people are so educated, nobody wants to do any manufacturing. So labor rates go up, and now it is no longer affordable to manufacture in China. So where do they go? It's going to Africa.
I was about to say, China's going to become educated and outsource their manufacturing factories back to the U.S.
No, it's also going to India. It's also going to the neighboring countries. I mean, look no further. The clothes you and I are wearing, I guarantee you, the tags in the back are probably India, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Why? Because they're cheap. This shirt, manufactured here, would probably cost you $100.
Yeah, but let's also look at it this way, right? A blue-collar workforce does not want or do not want their children to be blue-collar. They work hard so that their kids get educated. And I can tell you that after earning a degree in chemical engineering, nobody wants to break their back at the factory. It's just not happening. So what happens when you have an educated workforce that's too qualified for hard labor or skilled labor jobs? So that production is going to migrate somewhere else.
So what you're saying is that, honestly, if you just look at trends as education becomes more prevalent, more accessible even, right? I mean, New Jersey does a good job of trying to make universities accessible, affordable. We're just going to eventually have jobs migrating outwards, because that's just the nature of where the population is heading.
And that's completely fine, right? I mean, this process, with the way information travels, this process is only getting accelerated. I believe that we're going to reach a point where the American economy is going to be 99%, and I'll say 99% service-based, with a 1% being pharmaceutical production. the margins in pharmaceuticals are so high where you can afford to manufacture domestically. So that's my
I think
take
they
on
have
it.
to, right? I think the FDA requires their medications.
I think now after COVID, there is a certain set of requirements now. When we found out that our medicines are coming from abroad and our masks and gloves are coming from abroad, I think there's a bare minimum set as well now that a certain number of companies must be able to produce a set quantity in times of need.
There you go. So there's quotas, there's tariffs, there's regulations that are productive of a certain type of domestic manufacturing.
But also, one thing that we're taking away from this, I think it's not a bad thing that jobs are going away and we're left with the easy work, so to speak, right? I mean, we're here sitting, we're becoming thinkers, right? We're taking our time to think. Probably getting paid a lot more than somebody who's doing labor work, definitely are. But more importantly, we are then thinking of the next opportunity.
Yeah.
And so that thinking of the next opportunity is creating jobs. I mean, look at Tesla. 2 decades ago, it wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
Look at how many Teslas do you guys see around?
Too many.
California, it has way too many.
I can't go to Paramus anymore. Too many.
Something that started 2 decades ago, now within a decade in the future, like someplace like California, are mandating by, I think, 2035 to go fully electric, or zero carbon emission rather. And one way they're doing that is to go fully electric. I mean, look, in the span of 35 years, there's such a paradigm shift. And yes, are there jobs lost for other industries that closed down? For example, photography used to be a big profession. We don't have those anymore. You used to be able to walk into a studio or shop, take your little film camera, have the photos developed, and you paid for the photos. Now everyone is a walking, running, professional camera recorder and professional photographer because of the phones that we have.
Look,
but we found new ways to make money. People make money on YouTube now.
It's true.
Right? People make money on YouTube. I just found something very interesting today. You could host an IP, and people can use your IP address to access the internet, and they'll pay you money.
I was thinking about intellectual property when you said IP. I was like, what?
IP address.
Well, let me ask you guys something else, right? Here's what also bugs me about Bergen County. There's this consolidation there's a consolidation that I've noticed over the last 20 years when it comes to businesses, economic activity, or hubs. Why is it that if you take the northern half of Bergen County, there's nothing happening there, right? There's jobs in Englewood. You have LG in Englewood. You have the hospitals in Hackensack or Englewood or Teaneck. Why is it that Bergen County can't seem to really distribute all of these opportunities? Because keep in mind, I get frustrated about all the jobs and companies in Bergen County being in along Route 4 because that causes a lot of traffic, which is a headache for someone like me who just wants to pass through.
Yeah, so I'm going to offer one reason that I think, and look, the northern part of Bergen County, and I know this is a sweeping statement, but a lot of the northern part of Bergen County can't be developed. It's very mountainous.
That's true. Okay, that's a good point.
But to your point, I think one of the main reasons why you mentioned Route 4, it's very interesting you mentioned that. Route 4 comes right off the GW Bridge.
Yes.
If you're coming straight off, you hop onto Route 4, and it goes all the way up into, coincidentally, Fairlawn. And it becomes into 208, right? So if you just, it's not a direct line, but if you were to make a line, it's a straight line. And so it's not so much why aren't people going that far? Why isn't an opportunity up there that much? It's much more the accessibility to New York City. It's like, it's a 5-minute drive away, 10, 15, 20-minute drive away. And the further north you go from New York City, sometimes it's like a 45-minute to an hour drive. And so it's easier to build along Route 4. I mean, you have crazy amounts of stores and malls on Route 4. You have Bergen Town Center. It's humongous. You have every major car brand, I think, is on Route 4. You have humongous businesses like furniture stores, mattress stores. You name it. Everything's on Route 4. I would say the same for Route 17. You go up Route 17, everything is in Route 17. Any single store you can think of. high-end luxury. I mean, they even have a Lamborghini car dealership. They have Bentleys over there. I don't know about Bentley, but they have McLarens. I mean,
You're right. They have the Prestige group has like all
everything
the
you can think of is there, and so, and I think from an accessibility standpoint, if you say up north, I think they developed across on the highways, Route 4 and 17. If you go on up 17, right before New York City, that's where all the car dealerships are. So that's where people go to shop. If you go on Route 46 all the way down by Totowa, that's where all the car dealerships are. And so I think what they've done, or what naturally has happened is, it's not so much they chose, oh, let's create this area and develop this.
But
it's more so whatever was accessible by road. And that naturally developed. And as the size developed, it kind of fanned out.
You know, development comes up a lot, and I feel like when I was younger, Bergen County had like a personality to it, right? There was a lot more. I mean, the 90s was an easier time. I feel like there was more carnivals, festivities. Like every town would celebrate its day with like a parade. Now I feel like Bergen County is just sort of honestly an apartment building for New York City. Like I don't think there's if I had to tell people from out of state what Bergen County is known for, I don't know what I would say other than the Garden State Mall. Do you guys have anything that you would take away from the county and be like, yeah, this is what makes us Bergen?
Yeah, I think Bergen County is not really an immigrant county anymore, and I think I think if you look at places like Wallington, right? Wallington, at one point in time, used to be heavily Polish until it wasn't. I think that's part of the greater American melting pot dynamic, right?
Yeah.
In other places in Bergen County, you know, like for example, Fort Lee or Palisades Park, they're heavily Korean. I think there will be a certain point where they cease to be because we don't have that kind of cultural homogeneity. You know, people are going to intermarry, people are going to move, people are going to have, I believe, less cultural affinity. And I think it's part of just social dynamics. I think people are becoming more fluid in a lot more different ways, and that's what it is.
What's up?